Heyo, what is up, everyone? We are back in history through video games once again. Today we're going to be exploring a little bit of Watchdogs 2. We're going to be running around Alcatraz Island, home of the most infamous prison in American prison history, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. So I'm going to be referencing a map to my side here. It's actually going to be the same map that's in the video game. Just kind of giving a quick overview of what buildings are present on the island, a little bit of history of inmates, and what actually happened on the rock over the course of the years. So it was in super quick overview general history of the island itself. So it was discovered back in 1775 by the Spanish. So 1 year older than the United States was the discovery of Alcatraz Island. It's called Alcatraz simply because there were a lot of birds, and Alcatraz is a Spanish word for a type of bird. The Old Spanish, I think it means pelican, and there's a lot of pelicans on this island, so that's why it's called Alcatraz. There was a U.S. fort on the island over the course of the Civil War. And then it just kind of transitioned into a prisoner of war camp, prisoner of war prison, and transitioned into a federal penitentiary from the Civil War to the early 30s. So it did move from becoming a necessary thing through the Civil War, where they would put Confederate sympathizers into a POW camp, and then the Army essentially just continued to use it as a military prison. They transitioned it over to having civilian prisoners there as well. It was just set up to operate very well in that. So the first building that we're going to explore on the island here is building number 64. So originally named, there were not 63 other buildings that were in place before building 64 showed up. From everything I've looked into, I can't figure out why it was named 64 specifically. If you guys know, let me know in the comments. I would love to find out why it was known as building number 64. But it was the residential apartments for the guards and the military members who were stationed on Alcatraz. So their families also lived in those apartments. We can get a good look using our drone here on the game. And something I kind of figured out with Alcatraz is that there was a lot of nicknames for everything on the island, like the different corridors within the prison were named after famous streets. There's Michigan Avenue, Broadway. Well, for building 64, the largest apartments in the south, the largest apartment was in the southwest corner. It was known as the Cow Palace. And then there was a alleyway nearby known as Chinatown. So it's just an interestingly shaped building here, but it had those fire escapes on there. Actually, Alcatraz Island was occupied, if you want to call it an occupation, by the American Indian movement back in the 70s, and this is primarily where they were living at. And the game actually did not model the graffiti, but if you go to Alcatraz Island right now, above this sign, it actually says Indians Welcome right above it. So they didn't model that in the game for whatever reason, even though that is a pretty prominent feature of Alcatraz Island right now. But that's the view that you're kind of greeted with when you come off of the ferry to the island off the dock there. And then you progress in through the island. You've got the watchtower here. You've got a great big open expanse view of the bay. The whole point of this prison being on an island was it was very difficult for prisoners to even have the motivation to try to get off the island. All right, next building that we're going to explore here is going to be the Old Post Exchange and Officers Club. So it is actually just a shell of a building now, and they modeled that within the game here. I'm not going to be able to explore around it because I've got some bad guys down there. But if you look at the different buildings that are on the map, and on the rendering for this game, there are pretty accurate descriptions and representations of these buildings that are in disrepair, that are kind of in this ruined state. So that was the post-exchange building. All right, next two buildings on our list as we're moving our way down are going to be the Quartermaster and the Powerhouse buildings. So we're going to actually go through and look at what it looks like from our drone. So this first building that's got the smokestack to it is going to be the Quartermaster building. I guess that smokestack is going to be more connected to the Powerhouse, but it's closer to the Quartermaster. But then the Powerhouse is just sitting just to the side of it here, just next to it. So the Powerhouse itself was part of a $1.1 million modernization scheme plan that they had for bringing Alcatraz up to a little bit more operational standard as a prison back in the late 30s. And then it also was kind of another dock entrance for the island, but that was more for the supplies and everything coming over to there. But it did supply power for the whole island, hence the name Powerhouse. It had a tower station, which I do not know if they modeled that in the game, but there should have been a tower about where I'm putting the drone right now. It was just kind of looking over this whole northern side of the island, and in that station there, it had a 30 caliber Winchester rifle with 50 rounds of ammunition, so they were not going to be messing around. Also had a pistol up there with multiple magazines, 3 gas grenades, and a gas mask, because if you're using gas grenades, you may as well be protecting yourself from whatever you're going to be using there. So the Powerhouse and Quartermaster building are on that northern side of the island. Just more additional buildings that I can't really go in and explore right now. I've got some bad guys looking at me that whole time, so we're gonna stay out of those buildings and kind of out of that way. But that's where the drone is going to be helping us out. So we'll keep moving to the next building here, and I'm going to cut and jump back in just because running around this island with the character actually takes some time, and I just want to make sure that we're all set up there. If you ever do get the chance to go to Alcatraz and visit, I think it's something like 12 acres of total area. It definitely feels it in the game. When you're running your character around, it does take a little bit of time to go from one side to the other, so that's why I'm cutting in and out here. All right, so now we're going to be looking at the Model Industries building and the New Industries building. These two buildings actually held workshops for the inmates to go work as they're being imprisoned. It just gave them something to do. It gave the prison something to sell and kind of make money back towards the prison. So the first building here is the Model Industries building, or the original Industries building. It's a super weird shape, and that actually kind of led to it being neglected a little bit by some of the wardens who just didn't like the look of it. And this came into play when there was a massive storm that came up. This whole building shifted about 2.5 feet towards the cliff. And the warden at the time, this was in 1935, the warden at the time said, let's kind of extend a seawall and see if it helps it a little bit, but he really didn't like the building, and he didn't care if it would have fallen into the bay at that point. But it was 3 levels. In the movie The Rock with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, I think this building is actually used for some of the shooting there. But then the New Industries building is actually a little bit, so it was built a little bit later there. It was built in 1939. It was part of that $1.1 million modernization plan. So this was in that it was a 2-story and 360 foot long building. You can see it stretches a decent ways here, and it is 2 stories the whole way around. But it also then held those workshops for inmates to be working within the within the prison. There, I believe, was an escape attempt from this building during the course of it being in operation. One of the inmates either was using tools from the industry building or tried to get out of one of the windows from the industry building. My memory fails on which case that was. I just know it was tied to one of those escape attempts. So that's the quick overview for the rest of the northwest corner here of the island. Now we're going to get into the good stuff. The last few buildings here on the island are some of my favorites. All right, quick pit stop before we actually get into the main cell block here. I just wanted to briefly talk about the water tower and then the absence of the morgue on this map. Not sure why they didn't include the morgue. It's a super tiny building, and it's more just aesthetics than anything, probably is why they excluded it. But the water tower, because of how Alcatraz is situated, it has no fresh water of its own, so they had to include a water tower on the island to store some water that was brought in from the mainland by tug and barge. So they would literally import water from the mainland to the island with a barge and then offload that water into a water tower and store it. So this water tower specifically was able to hold 250,000 gallons of water. It's nearly 1 million liters. And it was all fresh water. It was used for drinking. It was used for firefighting, which I don't quite get that one. If you're going to be firefighting, just pull it from the sea. Don't use your own drinking water. So it was used for also the laundry, because you don't want to be using seawater for laundry. And I know that part of Alcatraz's downfall was the amount of seawater that was going through the pipes for other uses anyway, so I can understand why they wanted a lot more fresh water to be using. But it is also one of the other parts of the island that was in that occupation by AIM, and it also does not have any of the graffiti on it. I'm starting to notice a trend here where if it's, and of course those occupations have been very controversial topics, but it's just something that I've noticed where if there's any amount of controversy from the past, it's kind of been whitewashed over. All right, so starting up on the last little bit of the island here, we're going to start off in the recreation yard. It was walled off. You can see our water tower up there, but it was just surrounded by a high wall, little bit of grass here, mostly concrete, and then the steps leading back up to the rest of the prison. So it was a small area where prisoners were able to exercise just a little bit, get some fresh air, maybe rain like we are right now, because it is San Francisco. But now we're into the rest of the cell house itself. There's our map reminding us of where we're at, and we're not actually able to see the dining hall, the kitchen, or anything like that. We can't even see D block, which was the primary spot to put. It was the one that was known as the hole, so it was where they put all the very problem inmates, where they would put people who were either escape prone or issue prone. They just didn't want them with the rest of the population of the prison. So we are able to see pretty much the rest of the prison, though. So it's listed out as B block there, and then A block was right over on this other side. A block never went through a modernization in the game. Of course, they just put everything as those round bars. A block actually had flat bars, which were easier to cut through, so they stopped using those as primary holding cells for inmates. They usually just held them in B, C, and D. But the spot where I'm running around right now is Broadway, so that was in between A block and B block, and that was where you had the least amount of privacy. There was the most view from the guards up on the gun galleys here, and then you also had the view from the other inmates that were in the cells with you. So going up the next few flights here, you can see it was just rows and rows on top of each other of cells. Alcatraz Island itself could hold 300 plus prisoners at a time, and over the course of the time that Alcatraz was operating just about 26 to 28 years. 1,500 inmates had passed through the doors here. But I mean, it's a prison. It's not supposed to be comfortable. So looking into the cells here, you can see that there was a toilet, there was a sink that was open to the air that everyone was breathing. I mean, it was flushed with seawater, so it smelled worse than if it was flushed with fresh water. And those sinks were all cold. It was all cold water that was coming through there. There was no water heating going on until the 60s, which was just before the prison stopped operating anyway. So it's not like there was a whole lot of comforts going on, but it's a prison, so it's not really expected that there would have been. So coming over here, we're towards more the visitation side of things. The entrance that you would come in is right here, and we are now to the front, or the southern side of the island. You've got the Lighthouse. This is actually the oldest lighthouse on the Pacific coast of the United States. The building itself, I think, was 1909, but there's always been a lighthouse on that site since about the 1840s, 50s time frame. Then we've got the Warden House over here. It was burned during that occupation from AIM, but it was the warden's mansion. I mean, this thing was just decadent. It was an Art Deco style mansion, and it was very, very close to the cell, the main cell house here, for a reason. If the warden ever needed to be called in for anything, he was just right there. He could get woken up and could run over pretty quickly. So that's just why that was placed there. But it is now one of those ruined buildings. It's you're able to kind of see inside of it with the drone, but in reality, if you're going to go visit, they're not going to let you get into the ruins there. But the lighthouse here is a pretty ornate construction. If you're familiar with the kind of lighthouses and how they're built right now, they're typically not this octagonal look to them, but that's where that's at. And then this space to the extreme southwest side was the parade ground for when this was a military base. There is actually a helicopter landing pad that was over here as well, but I think this was also a spot that some of the residences that were replacing Building 64 were built, and they just have torn them down since. So that's why this is very empty on the map. There's not a whole lot to explore there. I've not visited Alcatraz, so I don't know actually if they've got anything set up within the tours or if that just stays open at this point. So that's something I'd be curious to see if it has just kind of remained in a very dilapidated state. All right, so that's been my super quick overview of Alcatraz Island. This is a place that's actually on my bucket list of historical places I'd like to visit, which is pretty extensive, but it is one of those spots that I would like to get to in my lifetime. So having video games where I can kind of go through and explore and get to run through allows me to see a little bit more of what I actually want to see whenever I get to that spot. So that's what I do enjoy about having video games that allow you to go through and visit these places that I don't live in San Francisco. I can't just go there on my weekends. I gotta plan a longer trip around doing that. So it's the video games kind of give us a little bit of an edge here when we're needing to look through and visit these historical spots. So that's the video for today. If you guys liked it, let me know. Drop a comment. If you can like the video, I would very much appreciate that. If you subscribe, I would appreciate that even more. I'm still trying to figure out what videos you guys are liking, which ones you aren't, so let me know what I can do better, or what you like that I am doing that's going on. But just stay tuned for the next video, and we'll see you guys later.